A couple months ago, I made a video talking about the best way to make desktop applications in C++. I hate them. A lot of you seem to like that and wanted more content, so here we are today. We're going to talk about Walnut. Something I made. So in that last video, which I will have linked up there, by the way, I recommend you check it out. In that video, I basically just took the ImGui example and showed you how you can kind of start building your own application, maybe using the examples that actually come with the ImGui repository. However, I mentioned that even though that is like a good way to get started, it's ultimately not how I would go about building like my own application using ImGui. So what I was initially going to do with this video is show you how you can make your own application using ImGui. But I ended up going a little further because last weekend me and my team did Ludum Dare 50. Ludum Dare is basically a game jam. We had 72 hours to make a game from scratch. Anyway, point being, after we actually shipped that game, we realized that we really do need some kind of launcher so that people can pick their graphics settings. And without getting too deep into the details, the way Hazel is structured is if we wanted to use Hazel's UI library, we would basically have to include all of Hazel since it's all a static library. That would mean that like the launcher app that launched the game would also include the entirety of Hazel and like all of its modules such as PhysX. Anyway, point being, I realized I really do need like the best of Hazel's UI library, which does use ImGui but has a lot of code on top of that. I need that, but like standalone, you know, without like the scripting engine, without PhysX, without the Hazel engine itself. I just need like the UI library so I can make a really lightweight app. And that's where Walnut was born. So Walnut is basically a simple application framework that is built with ImGui. It's kind of built on top of it, and it's designed to be used with Vulkan, meaning if you want to have some custom Vulkan stuff in there, you absolutely can. And I've also added some utilities so that we can, for example, load an image, display all of that stuff. But you can see that we can actually make an application like this. Now, technically speaking, this has like a custom title bar, which I haven't added to Walnut just yet, but that is planned. The cool thing about Walnut is it's actually using my own kind of custom forks of ImGui and GLFW, so it does actually include some code on top of that to support like custom title bars. And the plan is to basically take this a little bit further, make it into a bit of a series on this channel, implement some of these features and build this into something that you can easily use to make a nice looking desktop application using ImGui. This is also going to be used as the base kind of library for some other exciting projects that are going to be coming to this channel very soon. I'm going to link this Walnut repository in the description below. It's completely like free for you guys to use. You just have to make sure that you have some kind of version of Visual Studio. The setup scripts include support for 2022 because that's what I'm using, and also you'll need the Vulkan SDK installed. Now again, technically speaking, if you don't want to use Vulkan, you want to use something like DirectX 12, it's very easy to adapt this to use that because ImGui also includes an example for that. But because I typically use Vulkan, I thought I would just make this Vulkan. Okay, so let's go ahead and clone this and take a look at how it works. So git clone recursive. We need to get all of those submodules and we'll just clone it here into the Walnut directory. Now in this video, what I'm actually going to do, apart from show you how to actually use Walnut, I'll take you through some of like the architecture of how I did this. I mentioned that I did this for like Forest, the game that we kind of shipped like last week. So I literally did this whole thing in about like 6 hours, meaning that it's not really a huge amount of work and I should be able to take you through it, but I still didn't want to do it like from scratch in front of you all because it would take a few hours. All of the code is obviously inside the repository, so you should just be able to take a look at that. So let's go ahead and open that directory. Here it is, Walnut. The first thing you have to do is just run setup.bat inside the scripts directory. That should create the Visual Studio 22 solution. If we go back and open up walnut app.solution, that is basically like that's already our app, right? If we take a look at it here, that is the application. If we look at this project here, we have core and dependencies. You don't even need to look at any of that stuff. We just have walnut app.cpp, and that is like the only source file included here, and that is a working example. If we just hit F5 to run that, you'll see that everything should compile successfully and we get a beautiful kind of application. It's using the Roboto font instead of like the default ImGui one. That font is actually kind of embedded within the app, so you don't need to distribute the app with the font. This obviously contains all of our custom code, and if we go ahead and actually look at the example, you can see what it does. It's literally just these kind of 38 lines of code. As I mentioned, we'll talk about the architecture of how this works a little bit later in this video. I'll have that timestamped, but for those of you who just want to use it, you obviously you don't have to watch that part. We'll talk about that now. So basically, if we look at the CPP file, it's important that we include entry point, and then we just have to basically write a custom version of this function. It's called Walnut create application. Here are your command line arguments, and this is how you set it up. So you can see that I'm using this kind of application specification, which right now it just contains the name and the width and height of the window. So here I'm just setting the name to be Walnut example. And then we basically just have to create a Walnut application and then add like layers to it. So this works very similarly to how Hazel works as well. In fact, a lot of this kind of is inspired from Hazel. We basically just push on a layer. The layer in this case just being this little class that we've created, which has an on ImGui render function. And then optionally, if we want, we can set a menu bar callback. So this is what actually adds that kind of file menu here, which we have with the exit button. You don't have to have a file menu. If I just delete this and run it again, then you can see we just have no menu bar. And that's basically it. So this kind of function is just responsible for setting up the application, setting any settings you might want, and obviously pushing layers, menu bar callback, that kind of stuff. As Walnut grows, there'll probably be additional stuff there as well. So let's take a look at this layer. So we have this layer called example layer. You can see it's a subclass of Walnut layer. So at the moment, a layer is just this onAttach, onDetach, and onImGui render function. This gets called when the layer gets pushed, like onto the layer stack. That is what happens when the application closes or the layer gets removed. And this happens every frame so that we can actually render ImGui stuff. To be honest, this is kind of work in progress. I might just change this to be called something like onUI render, because that might make a little bit more sense. In fact, let's just quickly do that now. Okay, that's a little bit better. So onAttach can obviously be used as kind of a constructor. Now in this case, you can actually use a constructor. There's no reason why you need to use onAttach unless maybe you depend on other layers. Because at the moment, I mean, what happens is push layer just like makes it and then immediately call on onAttach anyway. The reason why this might be like useful in some instances is because possibly like Vulkan may not be initialized maybe at the point of you creating this layer. So again, not that you would do this, but you can just basically make the layer over here. And then if I make the layer over here, but then I just want to basically push that layer back like this, which you can also do, then at this point in time, like there is no Vulkan. So if I'm like trying to load an image or something, that won't work. However, as soon as the application gets created, we do have Vulkan. So because of this, if you write your code inside onAttach, then it will work because it will only be called when we actually push the layer. And at that point, we obviously have an application that's valid and all of that stuff. So that's why that kind of works that way. But for the most case, I guess it doesn't really matter. Okay, so if we add this back in, so over here is where all of your ImGui rendering code happens. Your entire application really stems from this layer. This layer can obviously create other class instances, and you can branch this out into your entire application as long as all of the UI rendering stuff obviously happens from within here. This is like all of ImGui here. So if I want to, like, I don't know, add some text, all of that will work. Here's my text. And then when it comes time to actually distribute the application, you can see there is actually a dist configuration. If we build that, we won't get the console and everything will be kind of optimized. We'll be compiling with optimization is what I mean. So here's our kind of dist example. And if I actually go to the output of this, so I'll go to build and just find this area here. You can see there's no symbols, there's no PDB included in this at all. We just have our kind of walnut app.exe. It's just a standalone exe file. Everything is statically compiled into that exe file. I can double click on it and there it is. That's my application that I can distribute. Just a single exe file. Now, one of the things that I've actually added to this, which is kind of important and doesn't come, like ImGui doesn't come with this out of the box, is the ability to actually load an image. Because if I want to display some sort of image here, I mean, ImGui does have some code internally to, like, you know, create like a font atlas that it needs to actually render text. So it does kind of use Vulkan for that stuff. But in general, like, it doesn't come with any utility. So that's one of the things that I really wanted to do with Walnut, is have some useful stuff. So we have this kind of image class that I've written. Now, to be honest, a lot of this code has just been yoinked from that font atlas stuff that ImGui included. I have gone through it and made sure that, like, it does work properly, obviously, for images. And there's two ways to actually create images here. You can either pass in a file path and it will load it using stb image, or you can actually just give it a width height format and a data pointer, and it will read it from some kind of memory buffer. This is useful because it means we can actually generate like some kind of image or texture or whatever and then just display it. So let's take a look at a quick example of actually loading an image. So if I drop into the working directory here, I'll paste in an image I have, hazel gradient logo.png. What I can do here is inside this class, as an example, I'll just create a shared pointer for this image, and then I'm going to load the image. I'll just pass in that file path, and that's it. So now if I want to draw it using ImGui, this is a Walnut image, obviously, then all I have to do, I'll do it inside this window here, is just call ImGui image and then image get descriptor set. Because this ImTexture ID is just a pointer to a descriptor set, which is a Vulkan thing, a VK descriptor set, and this VK descriptor set is just a pointer. It's a non-dispatchable handle. So this is kind of like what ImGui expects when you actually try and submit an image for it to deal with. And obviously ImGui works with more than just Vulkan. It works with like OpenGL. So for OpenGL, as an example, this would just be like the texture ID. However, this is like a 64-bit pointer. And in fact, I think there are some issues if you try and compile ImGui in like a 32-bit mode, which is rare these days. But anyway, the point is it wants this descriptor set, and then we can give it like a size, right? So we can actually ask the image what its size was. So I'll just do that. Image get width, image get height. Let's go ahead and cast this to float as well. And that is it. Let's go ahead and run this application. I'm actually still running it here. So let me just close that, run it again. And you can see we have our image. There it is. Now, one thing I didn't mention is this is all by default inside a dock space. So you can actually take this and dock it in. You can obviously drag these windows out. They work as expected. Let's go ahead and drop that in here. It's a normal kind of ImGui dock space. Now, most of the theme, except for the font, is the default ImGui theme. I'm probably going to change this as time goes on. In fact, I might make some videos showing how to change that. Let me know if you want to see those. But yeah, that's pretty much like all there is to it. Don't really have much more to say. Go ahead, download it, play around with it. Let me know if you find any bugs or problems. Again, I did make this in like 6 hours, so I'm sure that there will need to be some fixing of certain things. However, it should work pretty well, I think. Now, let's spend a little bit of time diving into the architecture, taking a look at how it works. So what we have inside Walnut is only like a few files, really. ImGui build is an important file. This is kind of like a Unity build of 2 CPP files. So these are just the actual Vulkan and GLFW files that we need to compile that are kind of the implementation of ImGui, I guess, that we'll be using, which in this case is the GLFW and the Vulkan implementation. Now, the reason why this is here is because in dependencies ImGui, this kind of build script that actually creates this, which is just a pre-make script that I have written over here, that doesn't include any backends or anything like that. The reason is we might want to use it with something else, and those are just the ImGui files. If you want a backend, you have to compile it yourself, which is what we're doing using this ImGui build file. So that's what that is. Then we have the application files, again, adapted from the ImGui Vulkan example. What I basically did is if we go to ImGui over here, we can go to backends, and then we have obviously like the glfw.cpp, and I think we have the vulkan.cpp. Now, no, it's not even that actually, because we use those. It's the examples, and then the examples glfw Vulkan, it has a main file. If we look at that main file, you'll see these two are very similar. Now, this has an actual main function, which my version does not, because that happens elsewhere. So this kind of what you see here in the main function, aside from this like loop, which is like the main loop, that stuff basically appears inside the init function. So inside my application class, we have an init function. Again, very, very similar. I've added some stuff such as loading like a custom font. So we have, I think over here, you can see the Roboto font gets added from memory because it's kind of embedded into the actual binary. But we load this from memory and then we set that as the default font, so that's obviously new, but mostly it's the same, right? And then what you saw there in this kind of while loop inside their main.cpp example, that just happens inside the run loop with a few kind of additional things, right? And in fact, I probably should clean up some of this stuff, but at the moment it's kind of almost the same as what you see there. Yeah, obviously I've removed some of their example code and all of that stuff, and the cleanup happens on the inside the shutdown function, which gets called by the destructor over here. So that's kind of just all I've done. I've kind of just made an object out of it, added some layer stuff, the menu bar callback, obviously that only happens if that is actually set. So if you remove it, like I showed earlier, you won't get a menu bar. There's no way to like disable the dock space or anything, but that's obviously fairly trivial to add. And then we have this kind of create application, which has to be implemented by the client, and that's what we saw over here, this create application function, but we'll get to that in a minute. I've also added some kind of Vulkan useful things, such as like getting the Vulkan instance, getting the physical device, getting the regular kind of logical device as well, getting a command buffer that you can arbitrarily write to as well as flush. That's important because that brings us into the next kind of section, which is this image class that I've added. So this is like pretty basic as well, just a standard kind of Vulkan image. We basically load it using STB image if you're loading and not creating from memory. And then we allocate the memory that we kind of need. This actually uses a staging buffer as well, so we can use GPU only memory. I am actually planning to add the Vulkan memory allocator to this library as well in the future, because that's very, very useful to have, obviously. So at the moment, though, it doesn't use that. It just uses the kind of raw Vulkan memory stuff. And then we set data, which we can do, by the way, like every frame or whatever. We can update the data. You can see if it doesn't have a staging buffer, it will create it, then it will upload stuff to the staging buffer, and then it will use like basically a Vulkan command here to, well, a Vulkan command list or a command buffer to actually copy that staging buffer memory into the GPU only memory, which is kind of the resident memory that it does here. Okay, so, and that's using obviously that kind of API, application flush command buffer, which I have kind of provided over here. So those are kind of some extra things that we need so that we can have images. And yeah, then we just have the layer class. So that's pretty much it. I've just refactored a lot of the ImGui stuff. The entry point that I added as well, that's probably worth discussing. It's very similar to like the Hazel entry point and the one that's in the Game Engine series. I'll have that video linked up there if you want to kind of learn more about that, because I explain it in much more depth there. The difference is that if we are, well, it only supports Windows at the moment, which is mentioned like in the README. But the important thing here is that if we are in distribution, since the way that we, like, since we build this using the Windows kind of system, so if we go to link a system, you can see in dist, it's Windows, that's like the subsystem, but in release and debug, it's console, right? And that gets set through the pre-make scripts, obviously. So because that's the case, we actually need to provide a win main. So win main and regular main, which is over here, they both call Walnut main, which is this, and this actually has its own kind of while application running, create the application, app run, and delete app. Now, why would this be in a while loop? Typically, again, this while loop only has one iteration, but the reason why this is useful is because, again, it's adapted from Hazel, and in Hazel we've had some things where we want to restart the editor, for example. And by having it in this, if we just kind of, terminate this application by calling like the close function that it has over here, which basically just marks running as false, and then that run loop will terminate. Then with this while loop, if we don't set that to false, then once it deletes the app, it will loop back around and create a new app, right? So that way we can kind of restart it. So that's why that exists. Again, not probably the typical case, but I guess Walnut does support restarting the app if for whatever reason you need to. Okay, that's pretty much it. I don't have anything else I think to show. Hope you guys enjoy using Walnut. Let me know if you want to see more ImGui stuff in the future. I will, as I mentioned, probably spend some time like showing you how you can theme it, and we'll add some more stuff like that custom title bar and all that. I am planning to do that. And obviously, as I mentioned, we will be using Walnut for a project very, very soon on this channel. Thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button if you enjoyed, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.